Welcome to today's hearing of the Congressional Executive Commission on China on corporate sponsorship of the 2022 Beijing Olympics. The meeting has been brought to order. As the world watches the Olympics currently unfolding in Japan, this commission remains deeply disturbed that in less than 7 months, another Olympic Games are scheduled to begin in the shadow of some of the world's most egregious human rights abuses. The Olympic Games exist to uplift the human spirit. Yet, unless something dramatically changes, in a few months' time, the Games will be held in a country that continues to mercilessly crush the human spirit in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, and in Tibet, among human rights activists and civil society, and anywhere where defenders of freedom stand up to the Chinese government's bullying. This hearing will explore how Olympic corporate sponsors can leverage their influence to insist on concrete human rights improvements in China and how they will manage the reputational and material costs of being associated with Olympic Games held in the midst of a genocide. It follows up on recommendations made at a May 18th hearing we held jointly with Tom Lantos' Human Rights Commission on China, genocide, and the Olympics. That hearing demonstrated just how deep the bicameral and bipartisan congressional concern is on this issue. I'm excessively grateful to Representatives McGovern and Smith for their partnership and leadership. For this hearing, we have invited the US-based companies who sponsor the Olympics through the Olympic Partner Program of the International Olympic Committee. We are pleased that all 5 companies whose top sponsorships run through the 2022 Beijing Olympics have agreed to testify. These companies are some of the most well-known and respected brands in the world. This hearing is not meant to attack or embarrass individual US companies, but rather to explore how key Olympic movement stakeholders, corporate stakeholders, can use their influence to ensure the Olympics live up to its values. Holding the 22 Winter Olympics in China and allowing its authoritarian government to reap the rewards in its prestige and propaganda of hosting this globally beloved event does not uphold the Olympic spirit. There is a parallel. That parallel is Berlin in 1936, when Hitler used the Olympics to put a real shine on his country at the same time he was already engaged in horrific acts against his own citizens, and worse was to come. But in this situation, it's worse than Berlin in 1936 because the genocide is already underway. As my co-chairman said in our last hearing, this is not the time for business as usual. We want to hear how Olympic sponsors can help us deny the Chinese government its propaganda coup, support inspirational athletes without channeling the money through an IOC that has demonstrated little regard for internationally recognized human rights, influence the IOC to improve its policies so that the Olympics are never again awarded to a country engaged in genocide and gross violations of human rights, and embrace Olympic ideals of diversity and inclusion without supporting Olympic organizing committees that plan opening and closing ceremonies that will cynically display religious and ethnic minorities that in reality are being subjected to the cruelest forms of mass internment, slavery, forced sterilization, religious repression, and destruction of cultural practices. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I'd now like to recognize my co-chairman, Representative McGovern, for his opening statement.
I want to yield to Representative Smith first, and then I will go after him. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, Co-Chair McGovern. And thank you, Chairman Merkley. Today's hearing is the second in a series which began with a hearing I chaired, joined by Co-Chair McGovern and Chairman Merkley on May 18th, 2021, just a few months ago, entitled China, Genocide, and the Olympics. While that hearing featured testimony from civil society human rights experts, today's hearing will focus on the corporate sponsors of the Beijing Olympics. In effect, those who underwrite and help legitimize what we're calling the Genocide Olympics. For let's be very clear what we are talking about here and why multiple hearings and concrete action on this topic are absolutely called for. First and foremost, we not only see genocide and concentration camps directed against the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs in Xinjiang, but also the ongoing eradication of the culture of Tibet, the harvesting of organs of Falun Gong practitioners, the destruction of Christian churches, and the dismantling of the freedom of freedom in Hong Kong. And yet, for many American corporations, it is business as usual when it comes to China, notwithstanding the communist government's repeated unwillingness to abide by its obligations and written agreements, including, in the case of Hong Kong, a bilateral treaty with the government of the United Kingdom. And while I appreciate that several corporations have sent their representatives to testify at this hearing, I cannot but shake my head in dismay when I read the preening about compliance with the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance principles, and the virtual signaling about their support for the Olympic athletes. For example, we have a submission from Visa's Amanda Fairchild, which touts ESG compliance, yet not once mentions Xinjiang or the underlying violations of human rights, which have prompted this series of hearings. Nor is she the only one. In fact, unless I overlook something, that the only submission that even mentions Xinjiang and makes an attempt to deal directly with at least some of the underlying issues appears to be the submission of Intel's Steve Rogers. To help clarify the issue before our witnesses begin speaking, we are talking about state crimes up to and including genocide, a determination made by two secretaries of state in the last administration and now in the Biden administration. And if it helps crystallize the issue further, unlike the 1936 and Berlin Olympics, where Hitler sought to showcase the superiority of Nazism, much as the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to use the Olympics as a platform to tout its alternative vision of global governance, the world in 2022 cannot claim that the extent of the PRC's genocide remains unknown. In light of this, my congressional colleagues and I, Senators Merkley and Rubio, Lantos Commission co-chair Jim McGovern and I, wrote to the International Olympic Committee's President Thomas Bach last week, stating unequivocally that, quote, no Olympics should be held in a country whose government is committing genocide and crimes against humanity, close quote. Nor should there be any surprise, as in October of 2018, Senator Rubio and I had also written IOC President Bach, asking the IOC to, quote, review and ultimately reassign the location of the 2022 Winter Olympics, given credible reporting of the mass arbitrary internment of 1 million or more Uyghurs or other Muslim ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and other ongoing human rights abuses by the Chinese government, close quote. My question that I hope all of you will answer, did any of you convey opposition to the IOC regarding Beijing as host of the 2022 Olympic Games? And if so, can you provide the commission with that documentation? I would note parenthetically that in the early 1990s, when China was seeking to host the 2000 Olympics, I met with the father of the democracy wall movement, Wei Jingsheng, in Beijing, who had been released from prison to help the CCP persuade the IOC to select Beijing for the 2000 Games. After China was denied the Games, he was promptly rearrested and tortured before eventually being released and allowed to come to the United States in 1997. And he was near dead. Wei Jingsheng testified in 1998 before my Human Rights Subcommittee and said that the bullies in the Chinese Laogai in prisons beat and torture prisoners of conscience more when U.S. officials kowtow and appease, and less when we are resolute and serious and penalize barbaric behavior. The PRC was eventually awarded the Olympics in the year 2008 over the rigorous protests of me and many, many others. So immediately prior to the beginning of those games, Congressman Frank Wolf and I traveled to Beijing to raise the issue of human rights and highlight the fact that the Chinese Communist Party was arresting dissidents in and around Beijing to prevent any contact with journalists. Will we have that again as well in the Winter Olympics? So again, these issues which corporate witnesses need to squarely address today, and how can you reconcile their ostensible commitment to human rights with subsidizing an Olympics held in a country which has actively committed human rights abuses up to and including genocide? I respectfully suggest that moral posturing, uh, uh, we need to, granted these corporations are not only directly complicit in China abuses, they're not, as Thermo Fisher Scientific, whose DNA sequences were used to collect the biometric data of Uyghurs. I mean, that is unconscionable. Further to the point, in 2006, I held a hearing when more representatives of Google, Cisco, Yahoo, and Microsoft testified as to their role in assisting the repression in China, especially with surveillance and denying people access to an internet that was not, again, in any way doctored. The year before, Yahoo had shared information with China's secret police, which led to the arrest and imprisonment of cyber dissident Shi Tao. Yahoo also handed over data regarding one of its own users, Li Ji, who had criticized the corrupt local Chinese Communist Party officials in online discussion, for which he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And Shi Tao, again went with Yahoo, got 10 years in prison. While your complicity might not be so direct, your corporate involvement in the Olympic Games nonetheless does further the interests of the government of China, which will utilize the Olympics as a platform to showcase its governance model, all while signaling that crimes up to including genocide should not interfere with business as usual. I also want to address the claim that we often hear when the issue of an Olympic boycott is broached. What about the athletes who have sacrificed so hard to make it to the Olympics? Yes, their willingness to sacrifice is absolutely admirable, exemplified by their commitment to rigorous training, regimens, and time spent away from family and friends. But sometimes greater sacrifice is called for from each of us, and that would include the athletes as well. I think of Ted Williams, the last baseball player that hit 400. He sacrificed some 6 years during the prime of his career to serve his country in both World War II and the Korean War. He flew a jet fighter, a Navy F-9F Panther, in 39 combat missions in Korea. One of those missions, his plane was hit and badly damaged, forcing him to crash land. Finally, I want to close by mentioning where this genocidal mania against the Uyghurs and other Central Asian Muslim minorities like the Kazakhs originates. And that's at the very top. In 2014, Xi Jinping, labeling all Uyghurs who dissented as terrorists, told his officials to wipe them out completely, destroy them, root and branch, show no mercy. This has led not only to massive internment in concentration camps in Xinjiang, but also to tracking down Uyghur dissidents from around the globe and seeking to have them extradited or renditioned back to China, often from Muslim countries such as Egypt and even Turkey, which in the past has provided refuge. One particularly egregious example of this crime came to my attention just yesterday, where a 34-year-old Uyghur activist named Yadersi Aishan, who had landed in Morocco from a flight originated in Istanbul, was arrested by Moroccan authorities, apparently at the request of the Chinese government officials. I understand he is in imminent danger of being repatriated to China. I intend to reach out to the Moroccan Foreign Ministry to ask that they withhold any removal proceedings, given the danger that he faces in the PRC. Perhaps my colleagues would like to join me in that endeavor. One reason why I mention this individual is that I would like our witnesses to keep in mind that at the end of the day, in this case, as in so many others, it is a person with a name who is being oppressed, in this case, millions. The fanfare of the Olympics cannot drown that out. I yield back and I thank you, Chairman Merkley, for chairing this hearing.
Thank you, Co-Chairman McGovern.
Thank you very much, Senator Merkley and my colleague, Congressman Smith. I thank you for convening this timely hearing on corporate sponsorship of the 2022 Beijing Olympics. You know, we hold this hearing as the Summer Games are ongoing in Tokyo, and we wish the athletes the best of luck. But in Japan, there is strong domestic opposition to their government's handling of the COVID crisis. I think it's probably fair to say that the Olympics are being held under somewhat of a cloud. No fans can attend. In addition, some athletes, including Americans Sha'Carri Richardson and Becca Myers, were denied the ability to compete due to arcane or obsolete rules. Now, this cloud is significant enough that Toyota, perhaps the best known Japanese company in the world, pulled its Olympic TV ads to stop its brand image from being tarnished. Its CEO joined executives from Panasonic, NTT, NEC, Fujitsu in choosing not to attend the opening ceremonies in their host country. In less than 7 months, as has been pointed out, the Winter Olympics are scheduled to take place in China. And unless things change quickly, the Beijing Games will be held under a cloud as well. A different cloud, a cloud of genocide, crimes against humanity, gross violations of human rights, and denial of religious freedom. The Congressional Executive Commission on China has documented these abuses. Our work helped lay the foundation for a legislative response. In the last 3 years, we have passed major human rights legislation on the Uyghurs, Tibet, Hong Kong. My CECC colleagues and I are working to pass our Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Both the Trump and Biden administrations have taken action to respond to Chinese abuses, including a ban on certain imports from Xinjiang made with forced labor and sanctions against complicit Chinese officials. So Congress and the executive branch are doing our part. Now we ask you, as American companies, to do your part. Congress and the executive branch are acting because when it comes to the Chinese government committing atrocities, we do not accept business as usual. Today, we ask whether you will treat the Beijing Olympics as business as usual. As US-based Olympic sponsors, your companies represent America on the world stage. We ask whether you're willing to stand up for universal values and use your leverage against genocide and crimes against humanity. As was pointed out last week, Senators Merkley and Rubio and Congressman Smith and I asked the International Olympic Committee to postpone the Beijing Olympics and relocate them if China does not change its behavior. Now, if we can delay an Olympics for a year for a pandemic, and that's what happened in Tokyo, we certainly can delay it for a year for a genocide. We've received the IOC's response, and they said they would do nothing, not even acknowledging the atrocities in China. Today, we ask you as American companies if you will stand with human rights principles to take action against the abuses in China, or will you side with the IOC and do nothing? Now, we hope that you agree that your company's reputational risk, noting that each of your testimonies cited your company's human rights values, is not worth the association with an Olympics held in the midst of a genocide. If Toyota can do it, well, why can't you? You know, what is, and I'll close with this, what is particularly galling to me about the IOC's response is its cold indifference to a genocide. I mean, this is not a policy disagreement. This is not a trade dispute. This is not politics. This is not even a question about a particular system of government. This is about a genocide. And we all appreciate, and I say this, I think for all of us on this commission, we all appreciate all that your companies contribute to our country, our economy, the global economy, the jobs, and all that you produce. But we are here because we are genuinely horrified by what is happening. And we have to believe that you are too. I think the question here is, what are you going to do about it? So I thank you very much. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back my time.
I'd now like to introduce our witnesses. David Holyoke is the head of Olympics and Paralympics partnerships for Airbnb. He leads the strategic direction, execution, and operation of the company's experiences, Airbnb for Work, and Olympics and Paralympics partnership teams. Prior to Airbnb, he established and built Travel Leaders Corporate into one of the nation's largest travel management companies. Paul Lalli is the Global Vice President for Human Rights for the Coca-Cola Company. He sets company policy, leads engagement with civil society on human rights issues, and oversees the company's global value chain due diligence program. Prior to joining the Coca-Cola Company, he served as GE's Global Counsel for Labor and Human Rights. Stephen R. Rogers is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Intel Corporation. Intel's legal, government, and China groups report to Mr. Rogers. He also serves on Intel's senior executive team and reports to the Chief Executive Officer. Before joining Intel, he was a litigation partner at Brown & Bain, PA. Sean Mulvaney is a senior director for global government relations and public policy for the Procter & Gamble Company. Before joining Procter & Gamble, Mr. Mulvaney served as a member of the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank of the United States from June 2011 until July 2015. In the Bush administration, he was assistant administrator for management at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Andrea Fairchild is Senior Vice President of the Global Sponsorship Strategy for Visa, Inc. She is responsible for leading Visa's global sponsorship portfolio. Prior to joining Visa, Ms. Fairchild provided brand building services for elite athletes and for businesses that work with athletes. She previously spent over 5 years with Gatorade and 10 years with Nike. Each witness will be recognized for 5 minutes of testimony. Mr. Holyoke, you have the microphone.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Merkley, Chairman McGovern, and respected members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is David Holyoke. I've been at Airbnb since 2016, and I am currently the head of Olympics and Paralympics Partnership. In our 14 years, Airbnb has helped guests experience the world in a more authentic, connected way. We began with 2 hosts taking in 3 guests at their apartment in San Francisco. Today, Airbnb has grown to 4 million hosts who have welcomed 900 million guest arrivals in more than 220 countries and regions around the world. At Airbnb, we believe travel can be transformational. It can break down barriers, help people get to know each other, and foster acceptance and understanding. The Olympic Games have shown that sports can do the same, bringing the world together through an incredible and inspirational athletic competition. In the same way that hosts are at the heart of the Airbnb experience, athletes are at the core of the Olympic and Paralympic movement. That's why we are proud that our Olympic partnership is premised on empowering and connecting athletes from different cultures, races, religions, and creeds, all under the banner of sports. As an IOC top partner, we are committed to a unique partnership to support both the economic empowerment of individual athletes and the role that the Olympics and Paralympics have historically played as a global movement to foster people-to-people connections. This commitment spans 9 years and 5 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and our partnership is designed to support athletes, not any particular city or games. Our athlete-centered approach is based on 3 pillars. First, supporting and empowering athletes, particularly via the creation of a specific category of Olympian and Paralympian hosted experiences to provide them with a platform to share their voice and earn extra income. Second, providing accommodation support to the Olympic family, including accessible stays for Paralympians. And third, supporting the refugee Olympic and Paralympic teams, which we see as an extension of our longstanding efforts to support refugees. Through this athlete-focused partnership, we are proud to do our small part to support Olympic and Paralympic athletes as they strive to achieve their dreams and inspire the world. As a company based on connection and belonging, we operate globally everywhere the U.S. government allows us to. We recognize that our global footprint means we have and will continue to face complex and challenging issues worldwide. That's why our core values and policies have long reflected our recognition of and respect for human rights, as informed by internationally recognized standards such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Everyone who uses Airbnb must agree to our community commitment, a global standard that requires all members of our community to affirmatively agree to treat everyone in the Airbnb community with respect and without judgment or bias. This commitment applies to everyone who uses Airbnb around the world, including users in China. In markets throughout the world, including in all the countries where the Olympics are scheduled to take place over the course of our partnership, we have removed listings and people from the platform when we find they violate this community commitment. This is an important part of our work to address bias and discrimination on our platform. which are antithetical to our mission and values. We are constantly working to improve and to ensure human rights considerations are embedded in our policies and practices. We're grateful for the opportunity to support global Olympic and Paralympic athletes, Team USA, and our host and guest community. Thank you for the chance to testify before you today to share more about Airbnb's commitment to these athletes and the Olympic spirit. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Lalli. Mr. Lalli, you may still be muted. We do not hear you.
Apologize. Chairman Merkley, Chairman McGovern, and distinguished members of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, thank you for inviting me to speak to you about the Coca-Cola Company's human rights commitment and our proud history of supporting global sporting events. We as a company, and I personally, share your passion for human rights and have the greatest respect for this commission's essential work. My name is Paul Lalli. I am Global Vice President, Human Rights at the Coca-Cola Company. In that capacity, I oversee the company's human rights policies and due diligence programs across the world. I also lead our human rights transparency and stakeholder engagement efforts. Almost a century ago, the Coca-Cola Company sponsored the 1928 Olympic Games and partnered with the U.S. Olympic Committee for the first time. In every Olympic Games since then, we have proudly supported the International Olympic Committee and Team USA. As the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee always stresses, no athlete achieves their dream alone. The Coca-Cola Company is proud to play a part in making these dreams come true. We're also a longstanding partner of other major sporting events, including the FIFA Men's and Women's World Cups, the UEFA Championships, the Special Olympics, of which we are the founding partner, and many others. We sponsor these events because we believe that sport is unique in its ability to bridge divides between people and showcase the best of the human spirit. Across our sponsorships, our credo is simple. We follow the athletes. We do not select venues. We do not endorse cities, countries, or governments. We sponsor events and competitors. We ensure that the vast majority of our funding flows to the athletes. With the Olympics, for instance, 90% of our funding flows to 206 National Olympic Committees, their teams and athletes, and the IOC Refugee Olympic Team. Team USA is the largest single beneficiary of this funding. In our sponsorships and our business, we have long been a leader in advancing respect for human rights. The Coca-Cola Company was among the first companies to commit to the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and we strive constantly to realize their ideals. Two elements are critical in that effort: due diligence and stakeholder collaboration. Both are pillars of our approach. Our policies establish strict and binding human rights expectations of our employees, our bottlers, and our suppliers. These policies are supported by a robust infrastructure to identify and address human rights risks across our value chain. We regularly disclose how we're doing with reference to these standards. The Coca-Cola Company Sustainability Report, for instance, is integrated with our annual report to make clear that respect for human rights and the environment is at the heart of our business. In pursuit of practical and meaningful difference, we engage with a broad array of stakeholders across the world regarding the full range of human rights. And we are proud of our strong relationships with so many leaders in the global fight for human rights, from Oxfam and Human Rights Watch to the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. We operate in more than 200 countries and territories, each posing unique economic, cultural, and political challenges. We do our best wherever we operate to improve the lives of everyone we affect: workers, communities, and consumers. Stakeholder collaboration empowers us to make a practical difference. Collaboration is also the cornerstone of our drive to embed respect for human rights in global sporting events. The Coca-Cola Company is a founding member of the Center for Sports and Human Rights. The center brings together sports bodies, governments, international civil society, sponsors, and critically, broadcasters to do what no individual actor alone could by building consensus and offering practical guidance. Much work remains to be done. The international world of sport is vast and complex with many different stakeholders and interests. The center provides a unique platform to bring these stakeholders together to drive practical progress, and we remain committed to its success. As we strive for this progress, we will continue to follow the athlete, but the United States is our home and beacon. We will always follow US law. And if our government decides not to send athletes to any sporting event for public policy reasons, we will treat that decision with respect. Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering the Commission's questions.
Mr. Lalli, thank you very much. And now Mr. Rogers.
Good morning, Chairman Merkley and Co-Chair McGovern and distinguished members of the Commission. My name is Steve Rogers, and I'm the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Intel Corporation. My role at Intel is to keep the company legal, ethical, respected in every jurisdiction in which we do business. My day-to-day responsibilities at Intel include managing the company's legal, government affairs, trade, ethics, and legal compliance functions generally. Additionally, Intel's China headquarters operation reports to me. Thank you for inviting Intel to testify today, and thank you for the Congressional Executive Commission's continued leadership and guidance on important issues regarding China. Intel is a proud sponsor of the Olympic Games. Our sponsorship of the Olympics spans several games and cities, including Pyeongchang, Tokyo, Beijing, and Paris. Intel supports the Games' overarching mission to bring together athletes from every corner of the world to compete vigorously and peacefully, to experience fellowship, and to participate in the symbolic nature of a diverse, inclusive, and global event that celebrates excellence among us. Intel is driven by our mission to develop world-changing technology that enriches the lives of every person on Earth. The success of that mission is predicated on the continued trust placed in us by our customers, business partners, governments, employees, and communities around the world, and includes our long-standing focus on corporate responsibility. Intel is committed to respecting and promoting human rights in connection with our operations, supply chain, business relationships, and products. In 2021, Intel was named one of the world's most ethical companies by Ethisphere, an honor that we have received for each of the past 10 years. At Intel, we pride ourselves on not just complying with the law, but going above legal mandates on issues of human rights. For example, under our human rights principles, we have foregone hundreds of millions of dollars in sales globally that, while legal, did not meet our internal standards. Intel actively collaborates in the business and human rights community, and we engage on human rights issues through memberships, partnerships, and participation in external organizations, as well as with leading human rights experts. Our engagement includes serving as a founding member of the Responsible Business Alliance since that organization's inception in 2004. The RBA is the world's largest industry coalition dedicated to corporate social responsibility in global supply chains and helps Intel hold suppliers accountable and to the same high expectations and human rights standards that we have set for ourselves. We are deeply concerned when we hear reports of human rights violations in any jurisdiction in which we do business. We are aware of the determinations made by the U.S. Department of State regarding the Xinjiang region, as well as the U.S. government's ban on the importation of products sourced from that region. We respect the rule of law and seek to operate ethically everywhere we do business. After conducting due diligence, we have confirmed that Intel does not use any labor or source goods or services from the Xinjiang region. We also take steps to prevent and mitigate the risk of our third-party business partners globally using our products to cause, contribute, or be linked to human rights abuses. Our sponsorship of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in Beijing does not negate or undermine our commitment or respect for human rights, or the activities we have taken for over a decade to prevent the risk of human rights violations around the world. Moreover, our sponsorship of the Olympics is not an endorsement of any specific host country, nor an acceptance of every activity that may occur within any specific country. We are strong supporters of the Center for Sport and Human Rights, which has engaged with the IOC and openly commented on the 2022 Olympic Games, including recommending specific steps that the IOC accept. It is our goal to conduct our business around the world ethically and to fulfill our commitment to respect human rights in all of our business dealings. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this hearing. Thank you.
Great. And now we'll turn to Mr. Mulvaney.
Chairman Merkley, Co-Chairman McGovern, fellow members of the Commission. My name is Sean Mulvaney, and I'm a Senior Director for Government Relations and Public Policy at Procter & Gamble. Thank you for the opportunity to appear to discuss P&G's commitment to respecting and prioritizing human rights, including our longstanding support of Olympic athletes and their families. P&G's support for the Olympic movement began with our sponsorship of Team USA in the 2010 Vancouver Games and continues today with our participation in the IOC's Olympic Partner or TOP program. This commitment spans 2 decades and 9 past and future games, from London 2012 to Los Angeles 2028. As an Olympic sponsor, our focus from the very start has been on supporting Olympic athletes and their families. To date, we have sponsored more than 400 athletes, including at least 100 American athletes. This support is particularly important here in the United States. Unlike in many other countries, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is privately funded and receives no direct funding from the government. The U.S. OPC is therefore especially reliant on private funding, with 33% of funding for Team USA coming from top sponsorships. This funding allows the U.S. OPC to pay for things like athlete programs, training facilities, competition support like travel and lodging. Simply put, it is the support from private sponsors like P&G that enables Team USA's athletes to compete and win at the highest level. Our support for athletes in the Olympic mission also includes direct athlete sponsorships, marketing campaigns, spectator activations, and providing essential personal services for athletes participating in the Games. For instance, one of P&G's central initiatives during the Games is the P&G Family Home, which gives athletes and their families a place to convene, relax, rest, and eat. Through our Olympic advertising, we also seek to champion the accurate portrayal of all people, including female athletes, while raising their voices and highlighting the causes they champion on and off the field. In the Tokyo Olympics, 16 of 18 P&G-sponsored athletes are women, and 5 of our brands are launching campaigns celebrating a diverse group of women Olympians. Separate from our role as a top sponsor, P&G and the IOC jointly established the Athletes for Good Fund, which in the lead up to the Tokyo Olympics has provided 52 grants to community causes that Olympic and Paralympic athletes and hopefuls support. These efforts are just some of the ways that we put our purpose, values, and principles into practice. And as all things we do, P&G is committed to respecting human rights in our Olympic sponsorship. That's why we ensured our top sponsorship contract required the IOC to maintain policies that respect human rights, and why we have supported the IOC's efforts to implement the UN guiding principles in its operations and oversight of the Games. It's also why, as a founding member of the Center for Sports and Human Rights, an alliance of organizations working to protect and promote human rights in athletics, that we have encouraged the Center to reach out to the IOC. Specific to the Beijing Games, the Center has engaged with the IOC regarding supply chain considerations, free speech protections, and protections against displacement of local communities. We have further urged the IOC to implement expert-developed recommendations on a human rights strategy, including amending the Olympic Charter to address human rights, building the IOC's human rights expertise, strengthening due diligence on human rights risks, helping improve athlete grievance mechanisms, and communicating human rights progress publicly. P&G has consistently engaged with the IOC to offer support as the IOC implements these recommendations. At P&G, our commitment to respecting and prioritizing human rights is fundamental to how we manage our entire business. In particular, we support the UN Guiding Principles. We encourage anyone of potential human rights concerns related to our business to share information, and we have set up a 24/7 helpline to enable confidential reporting. We have also extended our commitments to our global supply chain by adopting our responsible sourcing expectations for external business partners. These expectations include prohibitions on the use of forced or child labor, prohibition of discrimination based on race, gender, religion, other protected characteristics, prohibition of coercion, harassment, or punishment of workers, and respect for employee and consumer privacy. As this commission knows well, achieving respect for human rights around the world can be an enormous challenge. P&G believes we can make meaningful contributions in our shared objectives through collaboration and engagement with others. Thank you again for this invitation to testify this morning. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mulvaney. And now we'll turn to Ms. Fairchild.
Good morning, Chairman Merkley,
Good morning.
Co-Chairman McGovern, and members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss Visa and the 2022 Beijing Winter Games. Visa is a proud, long-standing supporter of the Olympic and Paralympic Games and the athletes who dedicate their lives training to compete at the highest levels of their sport. We view the Games as one of the most important global movements that bring people together to promote peace, friendship, and mutual understanding. At Visa, our mission is to connect the world to enable individuals, businesses, and economies to thrive. We recognize our responsibility to respect, advance, and maintain global human rights across our company and operations, and in connection with our global sponsorship programs. Our approach to respecting human rights is guided by the international frameworks, including the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which we fully support. Visa is also a proud founding supporter and advisory council member of the Center for Sport and Human Rights. The center is dedicated to advancing a vision of the world of sport that fully respects and promotes human rights through stronger accountability across the sports ecosystem. Visa's mission also underpins our approach to sponsorships. For more than 35 years, our partnership with the International Olympic Committee has been rooted in a shared commitment to make a positive, transformational impact on the world and in supporting the athletes. Visa is a founding member of the Olympic Partner Program, a global sponsorship program which was founded by the IOC in 1985 with the goal of establishing long-term partnerships that would directly benefit athletes who are at the heart of the Olympic movement. Visa also became the first global partner of the International Paralympic Committee in 2003. I would like to address the issues that bring us here today. Sponsors like Visa have no say in the countries selected by the IOC to host the Games. It has been that way for the entirety of our 35-year partnership and remains that way today. Indeed, the foundation of our sponsorship has always been supporting the incredible Olympic and Paralympic athletes and hopefuls in their journeys to achieve their dreams. And as long as governments allow athletes to participate in the Games, we will be there to support them. Without the contributions of the Olympic partners, the world's best athletes simply would not have the opportunity to compete at the Games. In fact, 90% of all IOC revenues are redistributed to support athletes and sports organizations globally, including the 206 national Olympic committees and international sports federations. This support is even more critical for Team USA athletes, as the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee relies solely on private funding to deliver on their mission of empowering American athletes to achieve their sustained competitive excellence and well-being. In addition, Visa created its own athlete support program called Team Visa more than 2 decades ago, focused on supporting athletes before, during, and after the Olympic and Paralympic Games. We are proud that more than 500 athletes have joined the Team Visa roster to date. Olympians and Paralympians representing the United States have generally had the largest representation on Team Visa, and more than half of Team Visa athletes have been women. Many Team Visa athletes have had to overcome significant challenges to rise to the highest levels of competition. The Olympic Games have been a bright spot for many athletes and allowed them to achieve their lifelong dreams. The Team Visa roster for Tokyo 2020 includes 102 athletes from 54 countries and territories and 28 sports. It's our largest and most diverse and inclusive roster in our history. We look forward to naming our Team Visa athletes for the 2022 Winter Games later this year. In closing, we know that when we empower someone, whether a local shop owner or an athlete competing in the Olympic Games, we can bring about positive change to uplift everyone, everywhere. Thank you again for the opportunity to represent Visa today, and I am happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Fairchild. And we'll now have questions, and we'll ask each individual to limit their questions to 7 minutes. So I'm starting the timer on myself because I'm going to go first. I'm going to ask similar questions of each of you, just kind of set a framework here. Starting with you, Mr. Holyoke. Does your company reject human rights practices like mass internment, forced labor, forced sterilization, religious repression, destruction of cultural and religious practice, arrest and intimidation of human rights defenders, and other violations of internationally recognized human rights?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Human rights is core to our values and principles, and discrimination has no place on our platform.
And all of those things that I just mentioned, you reject those as inappropriate activities of a government?
Correct.
Thank you. Second, if you sign up for another IOC contract, will you insist that the IOC not assign the Olympic Games to any country engaged in genocide?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Our partnership with the IOC spans 9 years. It's not about any specific games or city. We've had numerous conversations with the IOC about the importance of human rights, and we've encouraged the IOC to be transparent and engage with host governments about this important matter.
Okay, but you didn't really answer my question, unless you're saying, no, you would not insist that the IOC not assign the Olympics to a country engaged in genocide.
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned, human rights is core to our values. We've had, prior to coming into the partnership, and ongoing conversations with the IOC about the importance of this, and we would continue to have that dialogue with the IOC.
Would you consider insisting that your contract in the future be game by game, so you're not locked into being a sponsor of the Olympics at a nation engaged in genocide? So my first question was whether in renegotiating the contract, you'd insist the IOC not put the games in a country that's engaged in genocide, obviously putting you in a very difficult situation. But another choice would be to negotiate that contract and to go game by game, so you're not accidentally, if you will, locked in to this situation.
Thank you for the question, sir. We would continue to have ongoing dialogue with the IOC, and we would continue to express our views and values around human rights and encourage them to be in the selection, engage with host governments on this important topic.
Okay, well, I hope you will consider those types of possibilities. This is where your corporate leverage is, of not being put in this regrettable and horrific situation. This host, China, made promises in 2015 when it was awarded the Games about improving its human rights. It did not honor those promises and went the other direction. Went the other direction on Hong Kong, certainly went the other direction in the treatment of Uyghur and other ethnic minorities. If the IOC accepts such promises and a country doesn't deliver, would you encourage the IOC to move the Games to another country to reassign them? I'm sorry, were you able to hear my question?
I'm sorry, sir, was that directed to me?
Yes.
Would you mind repeating the question? Apologies.
Certainly. If in 2015, in this situation, China made promises on human rights to the IOC, those promises the IOC has never actually delivered the details on, but they said that China promised improvements. If a nation promised improvements, human rights to meet certain human rights standards, and they fail to meet those, would you encourage the IOC to have a practice of moving the Games?
Thank you, sir, for the question. And again, apologies for not hearing it originally. Prior to entering our partnership, we came in after 2015, but we've had numerous conversations with senior officials of the IOC around the importance of human rights. We continue to express and encourage them to be engaged on this topic with host governments, and we would continue to do so.
Okay, and several companies have noted that this is all about the athletes. The IOC has threatened to disqualify athletes who express concerns about human rights at the Olympic Games. Would you support, your company support athletes' rights to speak up about violations of human rights?
Thank you, sir, for the question. We believe athletes are humans first and foremost, and should have the ability to express their voice in peaceful manners that align with the Olympic Charter and principles. And so, our partnership is first and foremost about empowering and support athletes, and we would continue to focus on that.
And I'll ask you one final question, and I intended to ask these questions of each person. It's just you are our first person to testify, so I don't mean to be ganging up on you. But this one is a specific question about Airbnb. It's an article from the Telegraph. I'll ask unanimous consent to put it into the record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. And it's from the Telegraph, and it notes that Uyghurs and Tibetans are locked out of Airbnb in China's latest crackdown on ethnic minorities. And it goes on, this article goes on to note that essentially people have to put on their Airbnb listings that they will not allow Uyghurs or other ethnic groups to utilize an Airbnb listing. So here is a piece of the discrimination against that is part of the broader, even more horrific practices of genocide directed at the Uyghurs. Is this an issue you're aware of? And is Airbnb working to address this in the specific context of your company?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. Yes, I am aware of the article. Human rights is core to our values and principles. Discrimination has no place on our platform. Anywhere that we see language that is discriminatory, we take action to remove those listings and hosts from our platform. All of our users, whether host or guest, are required to sign our community commitment, which ensures that our users behave and operate on our platform without judgment or bias or discrimination. We regularly scan for listings and hosts on our platform where we see discrimination against minorities, and we take the action up to removing those hosts and listings from our platform. And to date, we have removed over 1.5 million people from our platform that have failed to agree to our community commitment, including users in China.
Thank you very much. And again, I apologize for putting you on the spot through my entire questioning. but I'll direct my next set of questions elsewhere. Meanwhile, my time is up, and so we'll turn to Co-Chairman McGovern.
I thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody testifying here today, and I appreciate everybody's commitment to human rights. But I kind of feel we kind of tiptoed around the focus of this hearing. Nobody really talked about what is happening in China or what is happening in Xinjiang. So let me, if I can, ask these are yes or no questions to all the witnesses, and yes or no, would your company be willing to ask the IOC to postpone the Olympics to allow time for the Chinese government to stop its atrocities and relocate if they do not? I'll begin with Ms. Fairchild.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a yes or no question. Would your company be willing to ask the IOC to postpone the Olympics to allow time for the Chinese government to stop its atrocities and relocate if they do not?
As a sponsor, we have no role in the site selection process of where the Olympics are.
As a sponsor, I would assume that you could make a request. So, Mr. Mulvaney?
Congressman, we respect human rights all around the world. As Visa said, we don't have a role in site selection. So I don't believe that we would be in a position to tell the IOC to move the games.
All right, Mr. Rogers?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The answer to the question is yes. We have stressed with the IOC the importance of human rights to Intel and have encouraged them to take these matters most seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Lalli.
We again do not have a say on the host city selection or whether games are relocated or delayed. We follow the athletes, but we work through the center to strive for a responsible event, including embedding human rights in any of the mega sporting events.
All right, Mr. Holyoke?
Thank you, sir. We've had numerous conversations with senior leaders at the IOC about the importance of human rights, and we've continued to stress to them the importance of being transparent and engaged with host governments about this matter.
The question is, though, would you ask them to postpone the Olympics to give China an opportunity to try to stop its atrocities and urge them to relocate if they do not?
Thank you, sir. We're not involved in the selection of host cities, but human rights.
All right, so another yes or no question. Noting that the CEOs of at least 4 Japanese companies declined to attend the Tokyo Olympics, is your company willing to consider not sending its CEO or their designee to Beijing? We'll begin with Mr. Holyoke.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Our partnership, as it relates to Beijing 2022, isn't about any large global marketing or activities. It's about empowering and supporting the athletes. Any activations or participation in Beijing is local in nature and focused in the China market.
Okay, all right, Mr. Lalli.
Chairman, again, we follow the athletes with respect to these games. I'm not involved in determining who attends with respect to our company.
But you do determine who. I mean, you will decide whether your CEO or a designee attends. I mean, that's a decision you make, not the IOC. So the question is, given what is going on, I mean, are any of you willing to? I mean, we've had 4 Japanese companies decide to have their CEOs not attend based on the cloud over the current Olympics in Tokyo. The question is, would you consider having your CEO or their designee not attend these Olympics, given what is happening there?
And Chairman, I respect the question, and our focus is twofold: on sponsoring and supporting the athletes, and on embedding human rights in the life cycle of these games.
Okay, Mr. Rogers?
We haven't made any decisions on who will or will not attend any particular games, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mulvaney?
We have not made any decisions as well on who attends the games. In fact, we're holding off on a lot of our marketing decisions in order to hear the perspective of you and the members of the commission.
Appreciate it. And Ms. Fairchild?
Yes, Chairman, agreed. We have not made those decisions at this time. And is not possible right now, several months out, especially given the variable of COVID-19. And again, our focus now is on the Tokyo Games.
Okay, all right. Let me ask you another yes or no question here. I mean, noting that Toyota decided to pull all of its domestic Olympic-themed television commercials for Tokyo, is your company willing to consider canceling its Olympic-themed television commercials for Beijing to disassociate itself from the host government's atrocities? Why don't we begin with Mr. Mulvaney?
Thank you, Congressman McGovern. You know, our advertising is always about the athletes. It's not about the host city. You can go back to London, currently in Tokyo, all of the games, it's never been about the host city. It's always been about the athletes. I'm taking all this in. Our company is taking all this in. Our normal approach to this is to advertise because it's about the athletes and enabling them to compete. And we portray the athletes and the grit and their family support.
Right.
And so I'm here to listen. I can take this back to my company, but I can't make a commitment that we won't advertise.
Okay. Ms. Fairchild?
Similarly, we are assessing the situation at this point in time. However, it is important for us to support the athletes. That's the foundation of our sponsorship, and we focus our advertising in that realm as well.
Right.
We will continue to assess the situation and make that determination.
Mr. Rogers?
Chairman, we have not made any decisions at this point beyond what we're going to do with the current Tokyo Games.
Again, Mr. Lalli?
Chairman, I'm not aware of our decisions yet regarding advertising in the Beijing Games. Our focus is on the athletes and on working through these multi-stakeholder initiatives.
Right. Mr. Holyoke?
Thank you, sir. We are not planning any traditional large-scale global marketing campaigns as it relates to Beijing. Our focus will be on empowering athletes and the sponsorship of the Olympic and Paralympic refugee teams, and any programs would be local to the China market only.
Yeah, and I know my time is running out, but let me just kind of sum up my thoughts at this moment. Look, we, as I said in the beginning, we appreciate all of the companies that are represented here today and as to what they do in terms of creating jobs and helping our economy and the global economy. That goes without saying. But and a number of you keep on going back to, we support the athletes, we support the athletes. Everybody supports the athletes. This is not about, this whole hearing is not about supporting the athletes. It is about that we are dealing with something, quite frankly, that is beyond the pale, that is at the extreme. What is happening in China right now, especially in Xinjiang, is beyond the pale. This is different. This is at the outer edges of what is bad. And I think that, again, with respect to everyone here, in addition to trying to send a message to China, and I know it is difficult because China plays hardball. And I know, you have to, you're worried about your profits and your business models and dealing with China. I understand all that comes into play. But there's also something else that I think people need to consider, and that is, reputations. Because I mean, we are talking about, you heard from Mr. Smith and from Senator Merkley, we're dealing with, a genocide that is unfolding that is well documented. I think we all took note that in all the testimonies, nobody really talked about what is happening to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Nobody talked about specifically what is going on. And I attribute that to, I think, trying to prevent a backlash from China. But I just say this is that, we want to stop. We want to influence China's behavior here in a good way. And we think that you can play a role in that. I understand the difficulties that you all face, but on the other hand, we are happy to provide you briefings on what is going on with the Uyghurs and others. But again, it is at the extreme and it is beyond the pale. So with that, I will stop and I will yield back my time. Thank you.
Representative Smith.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask each of our witnesses if I could, and this would be a yes or no answer. Knowing what we know now about the Beijing Genocide Olympics, should it be moved to another country and another city? If we could begin with Ms. Fairchild. Yes or no?
Again, as I stated in my opening statement, we have no, as sponsors, we have no responsibility in the site selection.
I understand that, but you know what's going on there and the myriad of other human rights abuses are being committed. But genocide is in a league of its own. Should it be moved? Yes or no?
I will respond to that by saying that our sponsorship commitment really spans several years. So it's not about a particular host city. It's more about the
We were just talking
long-term
about
support for the
Beijing
athletes.
Genocide Olympics. We all respect what you do for the Olympians. It's fantastic. But we're talking about a host city that is analogous to exactly what Hitler did in 1936. And Xi Jinping has said clearly on the record, he wants to tell the whole world how great his governance is, which is despotic, it's dictatorial, and it's a genocide. Should it be moved? Yes or no?
Again, I will answer the question by saying as long as the governments allow the athletes to attend the games, we as Visa will be there to support and sponsor them.
So that's no. If I could.
We will be there to support and sponsor them if the games are held.
But you don't think it should be moved? I just want clarity, just clarity.
I do not have a specific opinion on that. Again, that is not a decision and a role that the sponsorships play.
But as a human being and as somebody, as a corporation that believes in human rights, it seems to me that you have a moral responsibility to be very clear when a genocide is ongoing, when women are being raped and in concentration camps, forced abortion, forced sterilization, the men are being tortured as well as the women. And we've had on the China Commission, which I'm ranking member, and on the Lantos Commission, numerous hearings about what these individuals are undergoing. I'm baffled and disappointed that you can't just say, move the games.
I understand, Chairman, and absolutely recognize the seriousness of the issues that we're discussing today. We take note that the Olympic Games is what we are discussing and has brought us together to have this important conversation. But again, I will say again, that as long as the governments are allowing the athletes to attend the games, we will be there to support and sponsor them, including our American athletes.
Could I ask Mr. Mulvaney, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Lalli, Mr. Holyoke, if you could all answer that question? Should they be moved? The Olympic Games? The Beijing Genocide Olympics?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as Procter & Gamble, we don't have a position on moving the games. We support the promise and the potential of the Olympic movement, and that's our commitment over a multi-year horizon.
Can you not understand that this grossly undermines the Olympic creed, the Olympic mission, which I love the Olympics, as do my colleagues on this, on the Senate and House side. This is a beyond a unconscionable enabling of genocide, because we know what Xi Jinping is doing with this. In our last hearing, we heard from experts who said how he's using this to say to the world, look at our governance model and replicate it. And again, for those who are suffering in the gulags, in the Laogai, the concentration camps, how demoralizing this will be. But should they be moved?
Mr. Chairman, our commitment is to the Olympic movement.
Okay. But this hurts the Olympic movement as well as the people who are victimized so grossly. If I could, the other members, Mr. Holyoke, Mr. Lalli, you all could, and Mr. Rogers, should they
Thank
be
you, sir.
moved?
Our partnership is a 9-year partnership with the IOC. It's not focused on Beijing or any other single games. It's about
This is unique, isn't it? This is absolutely special and unique, special in a very bad way, because it's a genocide Olympics. Can you not say, move them?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Our partnership is providing dedicated support to individual athletes on an ongoing basis. Our purpose is to connect people, and we've seen that the games do the same.
Okay. Would the others like to answer it? Mr. Rogers? Mr. Lalli?
Commissioner, we have not stated a position on the location of the games. A couple of
Can you
thoughts.
do it now? Can you do it now with all due respect?
I heard this morning that the IOC has responded to the letter sent by the commission. I haven't seen that letter. I'd like to look at it. We will continue to urge.
I've read their response. It is a nothing burger.
Well,
With all due respect, it doesn't address this at all.
I haven't read it and didn't know it existed until this morning. So I've learned something.
And we've been asking since 2018 when Marco Rubio and I did the letter asking that this be moved. And again, this is totally bipartisan and bicameral. Let me just ask, I guess, did any of you convey to the IOC or the U.S. Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee this opposition or concerns about these Beijing Genocide Olympics? And also, if you could all answer this, has anyone in the Chinese government or anybody acting on their behalf conveyed to your company any penalty or risk of access or participation in the Chinese economy should you raise your voice on behalf of the victims and suggest that there be a move to another venue in another country?
Commissioner, the answer to your second question is no. And the answer to your first question is yes.
Okay.
Commissioner, this is Paul Lalli on behalf of the Coca-Cola Company.
Mr. Lalli?
We have conveyed to both the IOC and through the Center for these multi-stakeholder initiatives the importance of embedding human rights in these events. We've worked for years, including being the sole funder of the initial mega sporting events platform for human rights, to try to bring progress and human rights into these games. And I'm not aware of any communications regarding your second question.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to that? Whether or not there's been any threat by the Chinese Communist Party or anybody acting on their behalf that should you, like today, say, move the games, that there would be a penalty to your corporation and access to the Chinese market in any way?
In answer to that question, I can say no, that has not happened. In answer to your first question, we have had ongoing dialogue with the IOC, and as a top sponsor, we have encouraged the IOC to adapt to the recommendations contained in the December 2020 report on human rights strategy.
Okay, but again, I think this is so injurious to the Olympics movement in and of itself, but above all to the victims in China, whether it be the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Hong Kongers, Joshua Wong, who's appeared before our committee, and he's been prosecuted so grossly and unfairly by the Chinese Communist Party. And this is a reward. You know, in 2015, and I think you all know this, as Xi Jinping was doing the planning for the genocide in Xinjiang, simultaneous with that, he was telling the IOC how they would comport with human rights standards and norms. And we've asked the IOC to be specific on that. They have not told us exactly what promises were made. We don't even know how the American affiliate voted. It was a 44-40 vote, and Kazakhstan was the competitor, and yet 40 countries voted no. How did the U.S. vote? Maybe some of you might know that. We can't get that information. Why is that not transparent? This isn't the Manhattan Project. There ought to be complete transparency as to how that vote went down. But I'm not sure how much time I have. I'm out of time. I'm out of time. If there's a second round, I do have a number of other questions, but thank you very much. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. And we will now turn to Senator Angus King.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to this hearing with a great deal of interest, and this is a very difficult question, but it strikes me that we have the wrong set of witnesses here today, that our real beef is with the International Olympic Committee in terms of how the decision was made, whether the decision is now is under review as it should be. I've been a member of this commission for 4 or 5 years now. I've sat in on the hearings with regard to the Uyghurs. I think what's going on is accurately characterized as atrocious and genocide. The question is, these companies that are before us today made long-term commitments. One of the statements earlier was, why are you supporting the Beijing Olympics? My understanding is they're not supporting the Beijing Olympics. They're supporting a whole series of Olympic Games at different sites, and they're supporting the International Olympic Committee, and through them, the American Olympic Committee and the athletes. So I must say it bothers me that these companies, which have contractual relationships that span 8, 10, or 12 years, in the case of Coca-Cola, going back almost 100 years, are being asked to essentially say, you know, we're gonna boycott, or we're gonna insist on a change. They have no role, as I understand it, and perhaps I could ask Mr. Mulvaney from Procter and Gamble. Do you have, as part of the contract that you signed, that I understand goes back 8 or 10 years, do you have any control whatsoever on the site selection? Is that something that is, do you have a veto or a voice in that process?
No, Senator, thank you for the question. We do not have a role in site selection, and we can't force the IOC to make a decision or make a choice on its business operations. Now, that's not to say that we don't have influence in the situation. We do, and we try to use that influence as Procter & Gamble. As a part of the contract that P&G has as a sponsor with the IOC, that contract obligates the IOC to respect the UN guidelines on human rights in business. And we have a concerted effort to upgrade the practices at the IOC. We work both directly with the IOC and indirectly through other stakeholder groups to try to get them to upgrade their processes in 3 dimensions, really briefly. A, they need to change their governance documents. They need to amend their charter. Second, they need to aggressively create due diligence processes that are compliant with the UN guiding principles. And third, they need to create a grievance mechanisms for athletes. Those 3 items would be helpful in a situation like this, and they have a responsibility for that. And the companies on the panel today, including P&G, we do push for that, Senator.
Well, and I presume all of the companies would respond as Mr. Mulvaney did in terms of your role in the location process. And I understand that you, outside of your contractual, well, let me ask a question. Is it a contractual obligation if you said we're pulling our sponsorship of this particular Olympic Games? What would that do to your relationship to the remaining games, or to the relationship that you have with the IOC in terms of your legal obligation?
Senator, I don't know the details of the exact contract in the context of P&G in terms of a pullout. I do know there are penalties, and those penalties are probably written onto the entire scope of the contract. Again, our contract isn't written to a specific city, and so I can't address that situation.
Mr. Rogers, you're the general counsel, as I recall. What are the legal obligations under this contract that the multi-year contract that you all executed?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. And I knew as a lawyer this was going to come, that you bring this question to me, so I appreciate the chance to answer it. Our contract sounds like similar to P&G's, does not give us any influence over site selection, any ability to veto or change the site selection. It includes penalties if we don't live up to our side of the bargain, which is the sponsorship and other promotional and marketing events that we participate in.
And if you pulled out, if you said we're not going to sponsor the Beijing Olympics, what would the impact of that be? I mean, I suppose the members of this commission would say, well, maybe that would make Beijing change their policies, but basically it would leave the Olympic movement without a substantial form of support, and that would in turn leave the athletes without that substantial support. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, Senator. I don't know what portion of our sponsorship money, is the overall IOC budget. We do have influence on the IOC, and we've used that influence and continue to use that influence as a sponsor to encourage the IOC to improve on human rights. I think that the specific recommendations that I mentioned in my opening remarks that come from the Center for Sport and Human Rights are something that we have urged the IOC to adopt, and will continue to do so. I think one other key point, Senator, is the voice of the US OPC. Our contract is not just with the IOC, it's also with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And to date, the US committee has asked the sponsors to not drop our sponsorships because in their view, doing so would hurt the athletes.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that the next hearing we have should be with the IOC and perhaps the American Olympic Committee. I think that would be a more appropriate, those would be a more appropriate focus of our attention. Thank you again for all of your testimony, and thanks to the members of the commission.
Thank you, Senator King, and certainly future conversations with IOC. We hope we can, in fact, have them appear to address some of these issues regarding human rights and the selection process. We'll now turn to Congressman Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all the witnesses coming out today. And the human rights atrocities and abuse happening in China right now should horrify every one of us. Forced sterilization, labor camps, and murder are happening right now against the Uyghur and other Muslim minorities. We have a responsibility to speak out. I am just so honored to be in this commission because we really have to study that, what's really going on in China. Our witness today certainly felt compelled to speak out over the last year in the support of political and social protests. Coca-Cola spoke out loudly against laws passed in Georgia. Visa said change starts here, and highlighted their focus on global acceptance. Airbnb condemned racism, bigotry, and hate. But where are your statements against the human rights abuses happening right now in China? How can we support standing our athletes, the best of the best, who have worked so hard for these moments to a country with a backdrop of abuse and violence? A few months ago, Senator Ted Cruz and I sent the letter out to actually change the location of Beijing Olympic to another safer place for our athletes. But International Olympic Committee sent us a letter that UN's been supporting them, so they're not going to change it. So having said that, means like Beijing is going to be happening. So my question is all of you is this: will you use your public platforms like social media to raise awareness on the atrocities being performed by the Chinese government to end its abuse and to pressure China to end its human rights violations? This question is for all of you.
Congressman,
Commissioner, I'll go first. The answer to your question is that we have and will continue to speak out on the importance of human rights. And I would just refer back to my opening remarks just an hour or so ago in front of this committee, which specifically referred to some of the matters that you raised in your question.
Congressman, this is Paul Lalli with the Coca-Cola Company. We speak out very loudly on respect for human rights through our policy and through our industry-leading due diligence program. We require any business partner we operate with to comply with our policy, or we won't do business with them, period. We do business in 200 plus countries and territories around the world, but we are founded and headquartered in one, and that's the United States, and we're proud to call Georgia our home. So while we are concerned about allegations of human rights abuses anywhere in the world, we will always be most active, engaged in policy issues here at home. And we are proud to be, really have been at the vanguard of the history of fighting for voting rights and equality for the last 50 plus years, dating back to the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Congresswoman, this is Sean Mulvaney, and on behalf of Procter & Gamble, I want to answer your question and communicate, P&G's respect for human rights is fundamental to our business. Addressing human rights situations whenever they happen around the world is not a nice thing to do, it's a must-do as we navigate our business operations. Respecting human rights is central to our values as a company. And when it comes to communicating support for human rights, our advertising around the world reflects our beliefs in diversity and inclusion. And so you can look at examples and see how we walk the walk in that context, supporting human rights. And so I respect, the question. And you asked about sort of how we participate in the U.S. political system. And like Coca-Cola, we're really active in our home market. And we operate in 70 countries around the world and our products are available in 180. And so it's natural for us to be more active in this market, and that's why you see us active in this market.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. This is David Holyoke with Airbnb. As I mentioned in my opening statements, racism, hate, and discrimination go against everything we believe in as a company. We take the topic of human rights very seriously. It's core to our values and our principles as a company. We are committed to fighting discrimination and making Airbnb a place where everyone belongs and can succeed. All of our users from our host and guest community must agree to our community commitment policies, which requires them to treat everyone in the Airbnb community with respect and without judgment or bias. And we regularly monitor our platform, and where we see discrimination against minorities, we take the appropriate action, including removing those hosts from our platform.
Thank you. This is Andrea Fairchild, and I will just add on behalf of Visa in response to your question that yes, we do our part and we are extremely proud of the work that we do. We recognize that it is our responsibility to respect, advance, and maintain global human rights across our company and our operations. We do perform regular human rights assessments, and Visa has been recognized as one of the most ethical, responsible companies guided by those UN principles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I believe that Senator Daines is not back with us, but if you are, Senator Daines, jump right on. If not, then Senator Tom Cotton is next.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. I just want to say I've been listening to all the testimony here. This is one of the most pathetic and disgraceful hearings in which I've participated in my 8 years in the Congress. It's clear to me that every one of you were sent here probably with directions directly from your CEOs and your board not to say a single cross word about the Chinese Communist Party. And for that matter, I think most of you could be spouting talking points of the Chinese Communist Party. So we're going to see about that in a moment. I've got a few questions for all of you. First, though, I just want to address some questions to Mr. Lalli from Coca-Cola. Mr. Lalli, earlier this year, when the Georgia legislature passed an election reform law, your CEO, James Quincy, decided that he was going to weigh in against it, and your company was going to lead a bunch of other woke corporations to denounce that law. Let me ask you first, is James Quincy an American citizen?
I believe he is a citizen of, I believe he is, yes.
Can you tell me when he naturalized as an American citizen?
I do not. I cannot tell you that.
Yeah, well, your company and Mr. Quincy seems to have done an extremely thorough job of trying to conceal that fact. So I would like you to return to me on the record in written testimony, if necessary, if James Quincy is an American citizen.
Senator, I'll take that question back.
So your company said at the time that we will continue to stand up for what is right in Georgia and across the United States. So are we to take from your that statement at the time that Coca-Cola will not stand up for what is right outside the United States? Because that's what it sounds like this morning in this testimony.
No, Senator, we stand up for what is right across the world. We apply the same human rights principles in the United States that we do across the world.
Do you believe that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
We're aware of the reports of the State Department on this issue, as well as other departments of the U.S. government. We respect those reports. They continue to inform our program, as do reports from civil society.
This is what I'm talking about. Under questioning from Senator Merkley and Representative McGovern and Representative Chris Smith, every single one of you refused to say a single word, by all appearances, that will cost you one bit of market share inside of mainland China. Mr. Lalli, for instance, you were asked if Coca-Cola would call for the IOC to delay the Chinese Olympics, to give a chance for them to be rebid or for China to stop its genocide against its own people. And you said that Coca-Cola, quote, I think this is your exact words, quote, doesn't have a say, end quote. So can you tell me why Coca-Cola doesn't have a say in whether it sponsors the Genocide Olympics next year, but it does have a say in how the state of Georgia runs its election laws?
Senator, what I stated was that we do not have a say in the selection of the host city, nor on whether an Olympics is postponed or relocated.
Yeah, so you don't, but you could just make a statement. Your CEO could saddle up the same moral high horse that he got on when Georgia passed its election law and write a letter to the IOC and ask them to. Anybody can do that.
As I stated,
if he's an American citizen, that's his rights under our Constitution.
As I stated, we are most engaged on policy issues here at home, but we are clear in our respect for human rights globally.
Can you explain to me why James Quincy will not denounce a democratically elected legislature's laws, but he will not simply say that the IOC should consider rebidding its Olympics or that Coca-Cola should consider sponsoring the Genocide Olympics? What's the difference there?
Our role as a sponsor is to support and follow the athletes wherever they compete.
So you're sponsoring the Genocide Olympics. You are spending millions of dollars to sponsor the Genocide Olympics, yet you will not opine on any matter about it, yet you will stick your nose in the Georgia legislature's election reform laws. Can you explain to me the contrast?
First, let me say that we do not make decisions on these host locations. We support and follow the athletes wherever they compete.
Yeah, no, I've heard your talking points and I'm tired of hearing them, Mr. Lalli. I'm asking you a simple question. Why is it that Coca-Cola will opine on Georgia's election laws, but not on the Genocide Olympics?
As I stated, Georgia is our home. It's where many of our employees live and work, and we are most engaged on public policy issues here in the U.S.
I think the answer is you're afraid of the Chinese Communist Party. You're afraid of what they will do to your company if you say a single word, like, for instance, saying that both the Biden and the Trump administration are correct when they say that China is committing a genocide against its own people. Let's ask that simple question of the other witnesses. Mr. Holyoke, will you agree with the Trump and Biden administrations that China is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Human rights is core to our values and principles as a company. However, we would defer to the U.S. government or other experts who are better equipped than us to address that.
All right, let's try Mr. Rogers. Will he answer the question? Mr. Rogers, do you agree with the Trump and the Biden administration that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator, we don't do business in Xinjiang. That was true before the State Department issued its report. I've read the State Department report, I've studied it, and I believe its conclusions.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for a straight answer. Mr. Mulvaney, do you agree with the Trump and the Biden administration that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator Cotton, P&G supports human rights all around the world in our operations. On this particular issue, directly to your question, Senator, we believe that it is the role and responsibility of government to make these determinations.
Okay, so I'll take that as you also are joining some of your colleagues in dodging, and you refuse to state that simple, basic question. Ms. Fairchild, now to you. Do you agree with the Trump and the Biden administration that the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Thank you, Senator. We oppose genocide anywhere that it is happening, and that is why, as a company, we are guided by those UN principles. But as the other members have said, Visa is not in a position to make those kinds of determinations, and we defer and respect our governments.
All right, so 1 for 5. That's why I say this is the most pathetic, disgraceful hearing in which I participated in 8 years. Obviously, every one of you, with the exception on occasion of Mr. Rogers, were sent here with orders not to say anything that could offend the Chinese Communist Party. I'll just close with a story, Mr. Lalli. I used to drink a lot of Coca-Cola. Back when I was a kid and a young man. I stopped drinking it before I joined the Army because I knew the Army wouldn't offer it in places like basic training and officer candidate school and Ranger school. One night in Ranger school, when you get by on just a few hundred calories a day, we were able to buy hot dogs and Cokes. and I bought them because I was so hungry. I took a drink of the Coke and I spit it out because I hadn't had one in 2 years. I couldn't tolerate the taste of it. That's about the feeling I have today about your testimony and about all of the witnesses' testimony in this pathetic hearing.
Senator Cotton, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you reconsider that position. And we respect human rights globally, and we earn our social license every day. We take that very seriously.
Well, you wouldn't know from this testimony. Senator Merkley, I'm going to yield my time back.
Thank you. Your time has expired, but thank you for yielding it back. We now have Representative Malinowski.
Thank you so much, Senator Merkley. Thanks to the witnesses. I rarely in life agree with Senator Tom Cotton. I'm pretty much in full agreement with him today. So with that, let me start with you, Mr. Holyoke, and I'm gonna give you a hypothetical, and I'm gonna pick a completely random American city for this. Imagine there were a major sporting event in the city of Los Angeles, and you knew that the state of California was holding hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ Americans, Jewish Americans, and African Americans in concentration camps. And you further knew that even those LGBT Jewish American and African Americans living in California who were lucky enough not to be in concentration camps were going to be barred by the state of California from attending the sporting event in Los Angeles and booking Airbnb accommodations. Would you sponsor that event?
Thank you, sir, for the question. I don't think it's appropriate to weigh in on a hypothetical. What I can share with you is that human rights is core to our values and our mission. Discrimination has absolutely no place on our platform, and we take a number of steps with our hosts and our guest community to require them to commit to our community commitment principles.
So you're not willing to say that you wouldn't participate in a sporting event in the United States if hundreds of thousands of Jewish Americans in that state were being held in concentration camps. All you're willing to say is human rights are core to your values, but you won't apply those values to that kind of situation. I mean, I know the answer to this question. The answer to this question is you would absolutely not participate in that kind of event if it was in the state of California or anywhere in the United States. I mean, that's absolutely plainly obvious. Do you disagree with me?
So, as I stated, human rights is core to our mission and our values. Where we see discrimination occurring on our platform, we take the appropriate actions.
Right, well, okay, where you see it occurring on your platform, but are you aware of the fact, Mr. Holyoke, that in China, you can't stay in accommodations, whether a hotel or an Airbnb, if you don't have a passport issued by the government, an identification document? Are you aware that the Chinese government denies those documents to Uyghurs and Tibetans and that they are therefore unable to actually stay at your accommodations in Beijing for these games?
Thank you, sir, for the question. So obviously, we operate in 220 countries and regions around the world, everywhere that the U.S. government allows us to. We believe our platform is about building bridges between cultures around the world.
Are you aware of what I just said to be a fact? Are you aware of it?
In China, we are required to follow local laws and regulations. However, all of our users are required to commit to our community commitment principles. And where
how can they commit? How can they commit to not discriminate if persons of those ethnicities can't even show up at their door? Because that's the policy of the government.
We regularly scan for hosts and listings on our platform that are discriminatory against minorities.
I'm not asking about the host and listings. I'm asking about the policy of the government, which effectively prohibits those people from staying. And again, think about my California example. If the state prohibited Jewish Americans from staying in your properties, would you still run a business in that jurisdiction?
Sir, thank you for the question. Our policies do not require hosts to violate local laws. In some cases, I do understand hosts receive guidance from local authorities but they may not host guests from outside mainland China.
Understand. So you're just completely absolving yourself of responsibility for being complicit in abject discrimination. Mr. Lalli, let me go back to you here, because I have huge respect for the stand that Coca-Cola has taken on domestic civil rights issues. I guess in that respect, I do differ with Senator Cotton. And I understand why you might not want to echo a legal determination on whether genocide is happening in China. But are you willing to say that you condemn the Chinese government's policy of holding hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps because of their ethnicity and religion, whether we call that genocide or not?
Commissioner, we condemn any violations of human rights. Our policy is absolutely clear on that.
No, not any violations of human rights. Do you specifically condemn that violation of human rights?
We condemn all violations of human rights, and we respect the
So you
reports.
do not condemn the Chinese government's practice of holding hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps. You're not willing to say that? Yes or no?
Back to our clear policy on this, we respect all human rights and condemn any abuses. Our role as a sponsor is to try to embed these fundamental principles in the mega sporting events. And I would say that there has been progress in that space, but there's much more to be done.
I'm absolutely, I just think this is stunning. Again, you are absolutely right to condemn voting laws in the United States that make it harder for people to vote. You never in those cases said, well, we condemn any and all voter suppression. You signed letters condemning specific legislation. I understand and respect your point that the United States is special to you because this is your country. But I would also submit to you that genocide is a human rights abuse of such magnitude that when it is occurring in a country where you not only do business, but you are sponsoring an event that is beneficial to the government of that country, that you have a particular responsibility. And it is absolutely clear to me that the only reason you are not doing so is because you know for a fact that if you simply uttered the words, you condemn the Chinese government's policies, that you would be subject to a campaign organized by the Chinese government that would undermine your ability to make a profit in that country. You are afraid of them in a way that you are not afraid of critics in the United States. I think that's shameful. And I yield back my time. Thank you.
Senator Daines.
Great. Senator Merkley, thank you. And I want to thank the witnesses for coming before this commission and providing perspective on this very important topic. Certainly, I support American athletes continuing our longstanding record of success at the 2022 Olympic Games in Beijing. But I also believe it's very important to address the serious and legitimate human rights concerns and the atrocities occurring in China. To see what's been going on in Hong Kong, see what's been going on in Tibet, with the Uyghurs, with the very bellicose rhetoric coming from Beijing towards Taiwan, I think we all should be very, very concerned. Additionally, what concerns me greatly, and Senator Cotton alluded to this earlier, is the contrast between many large U.S. corporations, including some of the sponsors of the 2022 Games, who on one hand are criticizing U.S. states or some of the laws in these states while remaining silent on the repression of Uyghurs, Tibetans, and others in China. And that contrast could not be more stark. And in my opinion, it's unacceptable. On one hand, you see American corporations becoming very woke, while at the same time they're asleep as it relates to what's going on in China. Mr. Lalli, as you know, Coca-Cola CEO described a recent Georgia election law as, quote, unacceptable and a step backward, and released a statement expressing disappointment in the law being enacted.
And just last year, Coca-Cola was also reported to have spent millions seeking to weaken and modify the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. I see hypocrisy between these actions. On one hand, criticizing a U.S. legislative body, but at the same time remaining largely silent on the plight of the Uyghurs, and frankly working to undermine a key proposal to strengthen U.S. supply chains to ensure forced labor isn't utilized. I find that quite disturbing. Mr. Lalli, what actions has Coca-Cola taken to ensure that none of your supply chain utilizes forced labor, and how have you engaged the CCP in support of human rights?
I appreciate the question. There's a few points I'd like to make. First, I need to correct the record. We did not take a position against the legislation that you mentioned. That was erroneously reported. As a company that has invested much in its human rights program, we would generally support any legislation that practically and meaningfully advances respect for human rights. Secondly, with respect to our human rights program and supply chain, I appreciate that question as well. We have a industry-leading due diligence program when it comes to our supply chain. We have over 700,000 system-wide employees, over 900 plus bottling plants, tens of thousands of suppliers throughout the world. And we conduct thousands of on-site assessments with respect to that supply chain to ensure compliance with our human rights policy. If any of those suppliers, any of them, do not comply with our policy, they're required to correct that and subject themselves to a reassessment. If they either can't or won't comply with our policy, we will terminate that relationship. That is the way we handle all of our business relationships around the world. We've conducted over 35,000 on-site assessments since the beginning of this program. We use a number of other resources to corroborate those findings, to support and ensure that we're respecting human rights throughout our value chain.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps I need to differentiate between perhaps the position taken as a corporation of Coca-Cola and statements made by the CEO. But I think for many Americans, the statement made by CEO would reflect oftentimes the position of the company.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about federal legislation.
No, I'm talking about the recent Georgia election law.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, as I mentioned, we're a U.S. company.
I want to make sure I want to make sure we both set the record straight. You said my statement was erroneous, and I just want to make sure that we've got the facts right too. Because if I've got the facts wrong, I'll be the first one to say I'm sorry, I made a mistake. But I'm really going back to I talked about the recent Georgia election law, making a step back. So I'll let you go ahead and clarify that.
No, I appreciate that. I want to make sure we're clear on the record on that. I thought you were talking about the recent federal legislation. There
right.
No. We did not take a position against that. And you were right that we did engage on the Georgia voting rights law.
Okay. And I guess that's for me concerning the hypocrisy of, and I understand where your headquarters are and so forth, but to engage the Georgia legislature and positions taken by elected officials there on one hand, and remaining silent oftentimes with far worse situations in China. I guess that's the disconnect and the hypocrisy that I was trying to paint.
Well, I would just point out that we take the position on human rights consistently across the globe with our operations and those of our bottlers and suppliers.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fairchild, question about for Visa. Has Visa received any documentation or demonstration of improved human rights conditions in China as it relates to the Beijing Olympics related to it?
Thank you, sir. Not to my knowledge.
And were any human rights assessments undertaken at Visa regarding the 2022 Olympics? And if so, what steps were taken in response?
No, that did not happen.
Okay, so there were no assessments of human rights taken regarding the 2022.
Our last human rights assessment confirmed that Visa is focusing on identifying the right risk areas, which include the role we play as an employee and a purchaser, an e-payment enabler, and business partner and sponsor.
All right, thank you. Well, I just want to conclude by stating that we should have little to probably no confidence in the game's ability to advance human rights in countries under repressive regimes. And I think all of us were hopeful as we saw the liberalization of the Chinese economy over the course of the last couple of decades. It would lead towards greater freedom and liberalization of the political situation there in China, but that has obviously turned out to be very, very different, very concerning for many of us. Freedoms in China, frankly, have regressed since the 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing. Look no further than Hong Kong and the Uyghurs and the Tibetans and the rhetoric against Taiwan. And I have unfortunately and regrettably come to the conclusion that I see no reason to believe that anything will be different following the 2022 Games. And I just would urge all of our Olympics stakeholders, whether governments, sponsors, athletes, and others, to not provide cover or legitimacy to the CCP regime during the 2022 Games, and to work to hold the regime accountable and raise awareness regarding the oppression of its people. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Senator Daines, thank you. I'm going to turn the gavel over to Co-Chair McGovern because we have a vote on the Senate floor and time has expired. So that means eventually we have to get over there. I will try to rejoin. I just want to note that the next individual up is Representative Wexton. And then after that, Senator Ossoff, and I'll be returning for final comments. But before I hand the gavel over, Congressman McGovern, I want to just note in the context of the conversations today, there's some sense that we have no tools at our disposal because we signed this contract and we have no role. And yet it's clear that companies have a choice on how to advertise during the Olympics in China. They have power over how they attend. They have power over what influence they seek to exercise with the Olympic Committee through private communications. They have the power to make public statements of concern about gross violations of human rights or genocide. They have power over the decision on how they will structure their future contracts, whether they would accept a contract in which the Olympic Committee can assign the games to a country engaged in genocide or gross violations. They have power over whether they would choose to do an Olympics by Olympics sponsorship if the IOC is not willing to rule out placing the games with a country that has is engaging in genocide. And they have power over defending the athletes' rights to free expression at the games. Many athletes may choose to say that they are absolutely appalled by the treatment of the Uyghurs or other ethnic minorities. They may say that they condemn the crushing of the political rights of the people of Hong Kong. And right now, the Olympic Committee has a threat to take away awards from those who express themselves at the games. That is a power that they have reminded athletes that they have. And certainly you all could express, since you are saying that you are concerned about the athletes, could express a clear defense of athletes' rights to express their opinions at the games. So you do have many instruments available. And I just hope that as your company boards and executives will engage in some pretty significant thinking about how you exercise that set of tools in the context of the horrific practices and genocide that China is engaged in. So with that, Representative McGovern, I hand the gavel over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and I yield now to Representative Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things I like about serving on this commission is we have quite a varied group of representatives and senators, bipartisan, bicameral. We don't agree on a lot, but we are completely united when it comes to this commission. And I want to associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues who are very disappointed in the testimony we've heard today from the various witnesses. Mr. Lalli, how many independent bottling partners do you have in the People's Republic of China? Mr. Lalli? Can you hear me?
We have 2 bottling partners in China.
Are either of those in Xinjiang?
One of them has a bottling operation in Xinjiang, yes.
Okay. And in your testimony, you talk about human rights due diligence in suppliers, and you call them human rights assessments. I guess that's your terminology for them. Is that correct?
That's correct. On-site assessments. That's correct.
And those are essentially audits. Is that right?
That's correct. By independent third-party certified auditors, yes.
Now, that part of your testimony was kind of concerning to me because as anybody who's paying attention to what's happening in that region and this issue knows that auditing suppliers in Xinjiang is just about impossible. And it's why at least 5 international auditing organizations have already pulled out of the region. It's because it's a police state and forced labor is so systemic that it's hard to determine if there's forced labor in the supply chain. It's even harder to determine if there isn't forced labor in the supply chain. So another question I have for you is why don't you include China in your sugar supply chain report, which was one of the reports that you referenced in your testimony, in your written testimony?
You talk about the country sugar reports?
Yes, that's correct.
Those were conducted before I started with the company, but I think we based it on a review of kind of a geographic spread and risk approach. But we apply the same human rights standards and on-site assessments throughout our supply chain.
Okay, but those reports focused on key markets, and that was Coca-Cola's terminology, not mine. And there are 21 countries listed. China is the 4th largest supplier of sugar in the world, and Coca-Cola didn't mention it at all in these reports. Do you think that that's a pretty important oversight?
Well, I think there was not a separate report done, but the same on-site due diligence occurs throughout our sugar supply chain in China as it does everywhere. And if I may discuss a little further, because you mentioned the concerns over on-site assessments. While these audits are the foundation of our program, they're not the only tool we use. We actually do heed the advice that comes from our government as well as the NGO stakeholder engagement that we participate in regularly to ensure that our program is up to date and correctly assessing human rights compliance. In addition to on-site assessments, we use a number of other kind of mutually reinforcing approaches, be it grievance mechanisms, compliance investigations, stakeholder engagement to ensure that we're understanding the risks that we're facing in the field.
So are you confident, and can you say here in your testimony today that you're confident that forced labor does not exist in Coca-Cola supply chains in the People's Republic of China or in Xinjiang?
Yes, I am confident that the audits that we've conducted on our operations throughout the globe, including in that region, have shown that no forced labor exists. If it did exist, it would have to be corrected immediately, and if it wasn't, the business relationship would be terminated.
So Coca-Cola is the shining unicorn in the whole region, it seems, because you guys can say that your supply chains are 100% clean and nobody else can. Well, so that's very impressive to me. Now, if I may, I'm reclaiming my time. Now, one of the things that you said in your testimony is that you will always follow U.S. law, right?
That is correct.
And you're familiar with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act because because a previous person asked you about it, right?
Yes.
Okay, why did Coca-Cola oppose that legislation?
We did not oppose. Yes. Again, let me state, we did not oppose that legislation.
So what was the nature of your lobbying on that legislation? I mean, you certainly weren't supporting it because we didn't hear anything about that, and we would have heard about it.
We support any legislation that kind of practically advances human rights. With respect to that, at that time, we were having discussions regarding correcting a record concerning reports of importing of beverages or sugar from Xinjiang into the U.S., which we do not do. There were erroneous reports about that, and we were correcting those reports, as well as educating about our due diligence program. We did not take a position against that bill.
Then why are there 5 separate lobbying disclosures that were filed from Coca-Cola mentioning this bill as one of the things that you were lobbying during the 116th Congress?
The lobbying disclosures required that we reported the communications that I just discussed regarding correcting correcting reports that we were importing beverages or sugar from that region into the U.S. Those communications, my understanding is, I'm not an expert on these disclosures, but my understanding is we were required to report those, but they were not communications taking a position against that bill.
So will you be supporting the legislation in the 117th Congress?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Will you be supporting the legislation in the 117th Congress?
Well, again, there are a number of bills right now. We support generally legislation that advances human rights. And if I may get back to your point about forced labor, there are estimated, according to Department of Labor, over 28 million victims of forced labor around the world. It is an epidemic, a human rights scourge. It is a challenge every day to ensure that we have no forced labor in our vast supply chain. We do our best, and we continually improve our program. There obviously are no guarantees because we can't be watching every operation every day. But I assure you that we are doing everything we can with respect to our on-site assessments and the other approaches we take, and most importantly, our stakeholder engagement to avoid any involvement with forced labor. And when we do find it, we eliminate it or we eliminate the business relationship.
All right, so looking forward to 2022, if you guys do stay on as sponsors of the Olympics, there's going to be a lot of occasions where your logo is going to appear on various things, whether it be shirts or promotional materials, things like that. Have you given any thought to how you're going to ensure that your logo doesn't appear on promotional materials that were sourced with forced labor?
Absolutely. I'm glad you raised that issue. One of the critical components of our sponsorship, in addition to advancing this multi-stakeholder initiative to embed human rights in the full life cycle of these games, is to ensure that any of our products that are used in the Olympics do not involve any forced labor in their sourcing. That's the same way we do with our own products, as well as any products that are distributed at the games. That is a key component of our due diligence program.
Mr. Holyoke, how are you going to ensure that your logo doesn't appear on these items with forced labor?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Our partnership is a 9-year partnership that spans multiple games. It's not specific about Beijing. What we're actually planning to do is around supporting travel and accommodation needs for athletes and the sponsorship of the Olympic and Paralympic refugee team. We have no plans to have large-scale global marketing activities for the Beijing Games.
Very good. And my final question for everybody on this panel is how are you going to support athletes who protest the host nation's human rights abuses? How are you going to protect them from the IOC and the PRC and everything like that? What are you going to do to support those people who speak out? Let's start with you, Mr. Mulvaney.
Congressman, thank you for the question. Freedom of expression, it's a fundamental right. It's a right that P&G supports. We have conversations with the IOC about this right and other rights. And so we're extremely conscious that this is a big issue heading into the games. And so all of us have a responsibility to engage the IOC to protect that athlete right. And it is I know, an issue that is in dispute between the U.S. Olympic Committee as well as the IOC. And what I can commit to you is that P&G will use its voice and its influence with the IOC to try and encourage clarity on this issue and respect for freedom of expression.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Commissioner, thank you for the question. It's an important issue and one that we take seriously. We will continue to urge the IOC to adopt the position of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee on this issue.
Ms. Fairchild.
Thank you. I can say at Visa that we support and respect an individual's right to freely and peacefully express themselves, and we support our athletes in doing that.
Mr. Holyoke.
Thank you for the question. I would echo the comments of my colleagues. We believe athletes are human beings first and foremost, and should have the freedom to express their views aligned with the Olympic Charter and the power of sport.
Mr. Lalli.
We too respect the freedom of expression of the athletes, all athletes. We've made that clear both directly to the IOC and through the center. And I believe the USOPC has taken that same position.
Well, I hope that you guys actually live up to what you said here today, because you guys control the purse strings, and that gives you a lot of power. So I hope that you will actually do what you've said and stand up for the values that you have professed to have here today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether Senator Ossoff is still on the line or whether he had to go vote, but if he's Congressman Smith, do you have anything you would like to add?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would ask Mr. Lalli, he did not answer my original question about yes or no. Would he be willing to say, move the Olympics to another country and another venue? And just yes or no on that. And secondly, you know, the legislation that you and I, and you're the prime sponsor, I'm the principal Republican co-sponsor, HR 1155, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, since there is that presumption of anything coming out of Xinjiang that it was made with forced labor and therefore would be denied entry into the United States, given that Mr. Lalli is so confident that their supply chain is completely clean and there's no problem, they should be in support of this legislation. So I would ask him directly, and I would ask all the witnesses if they would like to opine on this, but especially Mr. Lalli, will they support now the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which has 89 co-sponsors? And again, you and I, you're the prime sponsor and I'm the principal co-sponsor.
Well, several points to make there. First, I can't comment on all the details of this, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Again, we didn't take a position against it. We support generally legislation that advances respect for human rights. Secondly, as I stated, we have tens of thousands of suppliers, and we are diligent in how we ensure respect for human rights throughout it and avoid forced labor. It is a challenge that we face every day. With respect to goods coming into the U.S., I made it clear, though, that we do not import beverages or sugar into the U.S. from Xinjiang. And we would generally support legislation that advances human rights broadly.
But again, you do utilize the sugar that comes out of China. Again, the fourth largest producer in other operations.
Our local bottler utilizes that. Our bottlers service their local markets. And so the bottler there utilizes sugar produced or farmed there. We have conducted on-site assessments, not only of the mill, but of the farms, to ensure that there's no forced labor involved in either. And so far, we've had no signs that forced labor is involved in these audits. But again, we continue to do reassessments, as well as a number of these other mutually reinforcing approaches, be it agreements mechanisms. So any workers in the world, not just our employees, but any workers in the world, can contact our company directly with problems or human rights abuses, and then we'd be able to know what's happening locally.
Again, knowing that, again, not to cut you off, but knowing that, because I know my time is probably very short, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and I would hope all of you would support it. You know, it's a way of saying we're not kidding when it comes to importing forced labor goods. You have said very clearly that you think that you are very clean on this. You said that to Ms. Wexton, and I appreciate that. But will you support it now? And will, for example, others on this panel support it? I mean, the message needs to be sent very clear and unambiguously to China that they can't hide this genocide. It is out in the open. And to know that some things are being made, even in the concentration camps, with Uyghur Muslims being coerced into making those goods, just makes it even more, all the more compelling. So will you support it? And again, you didn't answer the question yet. Will you support moving the Olympics to another city and country?
On the second question, we support the athletes. We don't have a position on if they're going to be moved or delayed. We will follow these athletes wherever they compete, but we will also continue.
So if they go to Pyongyang in North Korea, that's okay too? I mean, seriously, I mean, your voice matters. Coca-Cola is a giant, as is Visa, as are the others that are on this hearing, or participating in this hearing. we want your voice to be heard. And if you say, hey, IOC, hey, world, Coca-Cola thinks it's wrong, that will be listened to. So respectfully, can't you say that?
And respectfully, we do make our voice heard every day, both through our own program, but also through these initiatives, multi-stakeholder initiatives, that we engage these sporting bodies in a way, and we have seen progress in this space. There is much.
You said that to the IOC or the American affiliate. What are you doing awarding this to China? Did you?
We have engaged the IOC both directly and indirectly through these initiatives to make it clear about embedding human rights in these wherever the games.
I know you said that several times about embedding human rights, but how about moving the venue with a country that is committing a Chinese Communist Party genocide? This
is where we feel the approach that works the best is the multi-stakeholder initiative through the Center for Sports and Human Rights, because it brings together.
But can't you say on this hearing? I mean, we're all waiting with bated breath for all of you to say, move the Olympics. The Beijing Genocide Olympics need to be moved. Can't you say that?
We don't make a decision on the host location, but we work on the human rights aspect, and there has been progress in the space. We will continue to do that and speak clearly on both human rights and the need to embed them in these mega sporting events. We were the company that were the initial sole funder of the mega sporting events platform for human rights in 2015. We helped found that institution because we recognize.
I do understand all that, but again, you know, as some of my previous colleagues said, and I said it as well, I think there's concern among corporate America that if you do, they will deny you access. That's how they retaliate. That's how they are able to get away, literally, with murder. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to finish your response, Miss? I didn't want to interrupt anybody.
Thank you. I was just going to say nothing changes our commitment to this, and nothing changes our requirements of our suppliers, bottlers, and our own operations.
Right. And I think everybody has asked questions here. I don't see anyone else on the line. So let me close by saying to all of you that I think we all appreciate you being here. And there was some tough questioning here, I think, which is an indication of how strongly many of us feel. You notice that it was Democrats and Republicans. There's bipartisan concern here, and how genuinely horrified we are with what is unfolding in Xinjiang, and quite frankly, in a lot of other places. And I know all of you are good people, and we appreciate, you know, the commitments to human rights. But I think what is particularly frustrating for us, and you heard this from the people who asked questions, is that you can sense the economic coercion that is at play here. That if you even say that the genocide against the Uyghurs is wrong, that there could be some sort of regulatory retaliation. And a lot of you, you know, have strong economic ties in China. You do business with China. I mean, and I get all of that. I think what we're trying to say here is that things are unfolding in a way that it can't be business as usual. And it's concerning that, you know, it appears that oftentimes the Chinese government's interests are prevailing over values that are universal and over morality. And so I would just close with this. So I think in 6.5 months, the Olympics in China begin. And our goal here, and I'll yield back to, I see Mr. Merkley's back, but our goal here really is to try to find a way to persuade China to change its behavior. And so we have 6.5 months, and my hope is that that you can help us in these 6.5 months. And some people, you know, through a variety of actions, we went through a number of suggestions I did at the beginning of things that can be done. But again, we all believe very strongly that we're facing a reality on the ground in China that you know, is beyond the pale and is so horrific that we all have to raise our voices in some form or another. So I appreciate it. Now let me yield back to Chairman Merkley for any closing remarks he has, but I appreciate everybody being here, and I appreciate you appearing before this commission.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair McGovern, and I've just now this moment gotten on, so I assume that all of our senators and representatives have asked their questions. I want to join in thanking you all to appear. You chose to come and address this issue, which is a very significant one. And I do feel that perhaps there's elements of this conversation that will be fuel for thoughtful deliberation by many companies in terms of their relationship with the International Olympic Committee and the type of circumstances that they can advocate for. The International Olympic Committee does seek your sponsorships. They understand that the way they behave can influence whether they raise money in this fashion, so you have enormous influence. And it deeply, profoundly disturbs me because the whole world responded in recognition of the historical wrong of Germany being able to use the 1936 games to polish their international reputation, where they were already deeply abusing citizens, Jewish citizens of Germany and other groups within Germany. And that ability to polish that reputation gave a sense of empowerment to Führer Hitler that may have accelerated the things that followed. Certainly, we now are in the situation there is not something to follow. It is happening at this very moment. So each of us has to be challenged in our code of conduct for our own personal morality, certainly for the code of conduct for companies on how we respond to this. And as I noted before I handed over the gavel to Congressman McGovern, you have many tools to apply in this situation, and you have many tools to apply if you consider sponsoring the games in the future in this fashion as a Olympic partner, the top level of sponsorship. And also, I want to note something that I'm not sure ever became clear. There are many ways to support the athletes that do not go through the IOC and do not go through this top tier partnership. You can directly support the international or the American United States Olympic Committee. You can directly support other national committees. So you have options for the future in this pursuit of support for the athletes. If the International Olympic Committee does not listen to you all, collectively you have tremendous clout on how these games will be conducted in the future. So thank you again for sharing your perspectives at this moment. I think that is just something not everyone who's asked to come testify chooses to come testify. And so again, my appreciation in that. I think this is a pretty important discussion for human rights in the world and corporate governance in the world. And thank you for being part of it. And certainly the record will remain open for additional questions folks wish to file, and we will deliver those to you. That record will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday for any commissioners who wish to submit additional material for the record or for members who wish to submit questions to all of you. Thank you. And with that, we adjourn the meeting.